we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
That's nice. Here we go. Oh yeah, let's go. That's good. This guy should know. Let's see. Come, you masters of the war, you that build the big guns, you that build the death planes, you that build all the bombs, you that hide behind walls, you that hide behind desks. I just want you to know I can see through your masks. You that never done nothing but build, destroy. You play with my world like it's your little toy. You put a gun in my hand and you hide from my eyes, and you turn and run farther when the fast bullets fly. Like Judas of old, you lie and deceive. A world war can be won, you want me to believe, but I see through your eyes, and I see through your brain, like I see through the water that runs down my drain. You that fasten all the triggers for the others to fire, then you sit back and watch while the death count gets higher. You hide in your mansion while the young people's blood flows out of their bodies and's buried in the mud. You've thrown the worst fear that could ever be hurled, the fear to bring children into the world, or threaten my baby, unborn and unnamed. You ain't worth the blood that runs in your veins. How much do I know? And to talk out of turn, you might say that I'm young, you might say I'm unlearned, but there's one thing I know. Though I'm younger than you, even Yeshua would never forgive what you do. Let me ask you one question. Is your money that good? Will it buy you forgiveness? Do you think that it could? I think you will find, when your death takes its toll, all the money you made will never buy back your soul. and I hope that you die, and your death will come soon. I'll follow your casket on a pale afternoon. I'll watch while you're lowered down to your deathbed, and I'll stand over your grave till I'm sure that you're dead, says Bob Dylan. Let's count how many stanzas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 2016. 1 and 6 is 7. You're a genius, Mr. Dylan. Too bad you made a deal with you-know-who, in your own words. But even you warn people. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? These people sell their soul, and they do more sometimes than people who claim they never sold their soul. So that's a good intro, isn't it? Part 9. This is, remember, a critique of Mein Kampf, labeling Adolf Hitler as a, what I call, benevolent psychopath. It is the spirit behind Luke, I Am Your Father. And it gets the natural reaction of, how is that possible? I forgot I need the light to read too. It should be fine for this hour. Apparently it's National Podcast Day. The CIA on Instagram reminded me, so this wasn't planned, I just did it. So this is page 200, where Mr. Hittite, as I call him, says, particular attention should be paid to the press. You don't say, for its influence on these people, the 3 groups he gave, which were those who believe everything they read, that's Ham, those who no longer believe anything, that's Japheth, and those who critically examine what they read and form their judgments correctly, that's Shem. Ironically, he praises the third one, even though he hates Shem. Isn't that weird? That's what a sorcerer is. That's why it's Luke, I Am Your Father, because they're both Semitic in form, but not in spirit. So, particular attention should be paid to the press, for its influence on these people is by far the strongest and most penetrating of all, since its effects is not transitory, but continual. Its immense significance lies in the uniform and persistent repetition of its teaching. Here, if anywhere, the state should never forget that all means should converge towards the same end. It must not be led astray by the will-o'-the-wisp of so-called freedom of the press, or be talked into neglecting its duty, and withholding from the nation that which is good and which does good. With ruthless determination, the state must keep control of this instrument of popular education and place it at the service of the state and the nation. Although that's true, interestingly enough, he praises the Semitic mind that receives the information, but wants to take out the Semitic mind that gives information. That hurts his skull. So Mr. Hittite continues. This is the 9-minute mark. But what sort of pabulum was it that German press served up for the consumption of its readers in pre-war days? Was it not the worst virulent poison imaginable? Was not pacifism in its worst form inoculated into our people at a time when others were preparing slowly but surely to pounce upon Germany? Very interesting wording. Did not this selfsame press of ours in peacetime already installed into the public mind a doubt as to the sovereign rights of the state itself? thereby already handicapping the state in choosing its means of defense. Was it not the German press that understood how to make all the nonsensical talk about Western democracy palatable to our people, until an exuberant public was eventually prepared to entrust its future to the League of Nations? Was not this press instrumental in bringing in a state of moral degradation among our people? Where do you think the press hires its people from? Anyway. Where were not morals and public decency made to look ridiculous and classed as out of date and banal, until finally our people also became modernized? By means of persistent attacks, did not the press keep on undermining the authority of the state? Hands up, don't shoot. Until one blow sufficed to bring this institution tottering to the ground? Did not the press oppose with all its might every moment to give the state that which belongs to the state, and by means of constant criticism injure the reputation of the army, sabotage general conscription, and demand refusal of military credits, etc., until the success of this campaign was assured? What was I going to say, though? I was thinking of something, but I wanted to... I'll remember it later. He continues, the function of the so-called liberal press was to dig the grave... Okay, he says liberal press, right? But look at Fox News. You know how it's both. It's Fox News, it's CNN, it's both. It's whoever's in between. Oh, that's what I was going to remember. So there was a false prophet named Kimberly Clement. It was Kim Clementi was the more ancient last name, but he wants to pretend to be Semitic, so he loses the I on there. So Kim Clement, he talked about Trump becoming president, supposedly the only one. And obviously Trump is not anything good that would be prophesied, right? So that's why I say he's a false prophet, and there's many other reasons. He literally told people not to repent. It was pretty disgusting. Anyway, he claimed that there's going to be this movement of truth and that a righteous media was going to come out of it and be the top and only media. Just like Nazi Germany, huh? This could be Alex Jones and InfoWars. This could be Truth Social. This could be a conglomerate of it. Yeah, he does come in his own name. Shalom, George. I really hope it's shalom today and not some other wacky thing like the Ark being in Arkansas or, Jeremiah taking stones to Ireland. So the function of the so-called liberal press, he sounds like, what's his face? What's that guy's name? Rush Limbaugh, aka possibly maybe Jim Morrison, but he's probably just related to him. People like to do that. But I think Rush Limbaugh is just related to Jim Morrison. I don't think it's actually Jim Morrison, but yeah, Rush Limbaugh, the liberal press. He was like the pre Alex Jones. So the function of the so-called liberal press, Mr. Hittite says, was to dig the grave for the German people and Reich. No mention need be made of the lying Marxist press. To them, the spreading of falsehood is as much a vital necessity as the mouse is to a cat. Their sole task is to break the national backbone of the people, thus preparing the nation to become the slaves of international finance and its master, the Jays. Now remember, those are Soviets, and he calls them what they want to be called, instead of exposing them and Queen Victoria and her two nephews, Kaiser and Tsar Nicholas. Morrison Follow was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin, incident, and belonged to the CIA. Yeah, I think it's Morrison. Sometimes I get them mixed up with others, but I'm pretty sure, Jim Morrison was the his father was the Gulf of Tonkin guy. And then, like, Frank Zappa, he said a lot of true things, but Frank Zappa was like, look up Frank Zappa and the Tavistock Institute and all that. It's really crazy. So he continues, and what measures did the state take to counteract this wholesale poisoning of the public mind? None, absolutely nothing at all. By this policy, it was hoped to win the favor of this pest by means of flattery, by a recognition of the value of the press and its importance, its educative mission. All these quotations are in the book, remember, and similar nonsense. The Jays, which are actually the Soviets, acknowledged all this with a knowing smile and returned thanks. The reason for this ignominious failure on the part of the state lay not so much in its refusal to realize the danger as in the out-and-out cowardly way of meeting the situation by the adoption of faulty and ineffective measures. This is now page 201 at the 16-minute mark. Wow, that's interesting. Remember Event 201? Who became president in 2016? Yeah, like Zappa said some good things, but supposedly he was behind the hippie movement, like to give them the LSD and to even control, like make the fad of what the clothes they wear. Trend, that's the word I'm looking for. That's just what I've heard, but you know, Frank Zappa might have had lies about him. The only reason why I believe he's in on it is because he named his children like weird names, like Moon Unit and something else. I was like, that's the only reason I give any credence to the Tavistock stuff, because the names of his children are so weird. Like, who would name their kids that unless they're like insane? So yeah, we entered the 16-minute mark on page 201, Event 201. If you look that up. So let's see if there's anything funny on this page, because I like their synchronicities do exist. You just don't really follow them. You just accept them and nod and go on your way. So Mr. Hittite says, no one had the courage to employ any energetic and radical methods. Everyone temporized in some way or other, and instead of striking at its heart, the viper was only further irritated. The result was that not only did everything remain as it was, but the power of this institution, which should have been combated, grew greater from year to year. The defense put up by the government in those days against a mainly J-controlled press, hobo code for Soviets, in my opinion, that was slowly corrupting the nation, followed no definite line of action. It had no determination behind it, and above all, no fixed objective whatever in view. That's a Soviet media. This is where official understanding of the situation completely failed, both in estimating the importance of the struggle, choosing the means, and deciding on a definite plan. They merely tinkered with the problem. Occasionally, when bitten, they imprisoned one or another journalist viper for a few weeks or months, but the whole poisonous brood was allowed to carry on in peace. Yeah, that's about how it goes. Oh yeah, his son's name was Dweezil. Most celebrities name their children unique and strange names. Yeah. He continues, it must be admitted that all this was partly the result of extraordinary crafty tactics on part of the Jays, he says, but I say Soviets. On the one hand, an obvious official stupidity or naive on the other hand. And remember, like, some of these people could be Semitic, but it's just like Hitler. Hitler has certain Semitic qualities, but he's a Hittite. He chose to be hateful and warlike, so he turned into a sorcerer. I mean, it could have been sorcerers in the German media, and that's where a lot of sorcerers unfortunately come from. If somebody in childhood accepts Abrahamic teachings or higher, like David and Moses and Messiah ultimately, then he develops Semitic features. Now, if he rejects it, he usually becomes a sorcerer in one way or another. So it's not like I'm saying there was none in the media. I label them Soviets because according to scripture, if you don't believe in that Yeshua was the Mashiach, then you're not part of Israel. If you do, it doesn't matter where your nation what nation you're from, because you most likely develop Semitic features. It's like, so I'll probably do a specific episode one day on the real anti-Semitism, because they like to throw that word around as a liability shield, but there is true anti-Semitism, and it has nothing to do with blood. But I'll get into that another time. I've already said it like a couple times, but I want to do a specific episode. So Mr. Hittite continues, the Jays, aka Soviets, in my opinion, were too clever to allow a simultaneous attack to be made on the whole of their press. No one section functioned as cover for the other, while the Marxist newspaper, in the most despicable manner possible, reviled everything that was sacred. So they slayed all sacred cows, huh? Furiously attacked the state and government, and incited certain classes of the community against each other. The bourgeois democratic papers, also in J hands, he says, knew how to camouflage themselves as model examples of objectivity. Oh boy, if anybody knows who Owen Benjamin is, apparently he's a Marxist, because this describes him so perfectly. Anyway. He continues, they studiously avoided harsh language, knowing well that blockheads are capable of judging only by external appearances, and never able to penetrate the real depth and meaning of anything. They measure the worth of an object by its exterior and not by its content. Wow. This form of human frailty was carefully studied and understood by the press, and apparently unwanted Hollywood rubbish. Wow. Play us a song, young piano man. Try not to play out of key, 'cause your fingers may be long, but your thumb is not quite. Well, I couldn't rhyme that last part. Who cares? Anyway. Mr. Hittite continues, for this class of blockheads, the Frankfurter Zeitung would be acknowledged as the essence of respectability. It always carefully avoided calling a spade a spade. In other words, it kept saying allegedly. Oh, this is fun. It depreciated the use of every form of physical force, and persistently appealed to the nobility of fighting with intellectual weapons. But this fight, curiously enough, was most popular with the least intellectual classes. That is one of the results of our defective education, which turns the youth away from the instructive dictates of nature. Again, remember, he's godless. He always says like nature or something. Pumps into them a certain amount of knowledge without, however, being able to bring them to what is the supreme act of knowing. That sounds like he sounds pretty Gnostic when he says that. Not that, he's saying what's true, but in this sense, just like Trump says some truths, I mean, it's really hard to be only lies. Really hard. I mean, usually the only people who are only lies is like really, really bad drug addicts. So he continues, to this end, diligence and goodwill are of no avail. They're just called gammas, right? If innate understanding fail, this final knowledge at which man must aim is the understanding of causes which are instinctively perceived. So anybody who doesn't know who Owen Benjamin is won't laugh as much as I did at this part. Do yourself a favor and never look him up. Let me explain, he says. Man must not fall into the error of thinking that he was ever meant to become Lord and Master of nature. Wow. It literally says in Genesis he is the Lord and Master of nature. Elohim gave him that. He said, be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over the birds of the heaven and the beasts of the earth and what is in the sea, and have dominion over them. Basically, make them produce for you. But these little nature worshippers want to call you a tyrant for believing that. Well, you're tyrannical over nature. And then they proceed to become Nazis. Isn't that cute? A lopsided education, he says, has helped to encourage that illusion. It's not an illusion. It's biblical fact. So now page 202 at the 26-minute mark here. Man must realize that a fundamental law of necessity reigns throughout the whole realm of nature. Yeah. And that his existence is subject to the law of eternal struggle and strife. Yeah, that still doesn't mean he can't have dominion over it. So Mr. Hittite says, he will then feel that there cannot be a separate law for mankind in a world in which planets and suns follow their orbits. Oh, good Lord. You gotta understand, this is why I try to tell people about NASA and everything. It's like, there have been sorcerers that are basically NASA for thousands of years. They claim to astral project and go to the heavens. Sometimes they say physically. They say all kinds of things that can actually happen. And they have blasphemous names written all over them. So let's listen to the Führer Copernicus right now, which is Copernic. He will then feel that there cannot be a separate law for mankind, even though there is. It's called the law of Moshe. It's called Elohim's law. In a world in which planets and suns follow their orbits, where moons and planets trace their destinated paths, where the strong are always the masters of the weak, and where those subject to such laws must obey them or be destroyed. It's magic. Man must also submit, he says, to the eternal principles of this supreme wisdom. He may try to understand them, but he can never free himself from their sway. So is he trying to say nature rules over man? I mean, no wonder his whole thing failed. Anyway. He continues, it is just for intellectual demimonde, whatever that is, that the J, hobo code for Soviet, writes those papers which he calls his intellectual press. For them, the Frankfurter Zeitung and Berliner Tageblatt are written, the tone being adapted to them, and it is over these people that such papers have an influence, while studiously avoiding all forms of expression that might strike the reader as crude. The poison is injected from other vials into the hearts of the clientele. Again, with that interesting verbiage. I'll be like him, I'll say smart words. Verbiage. The effervescent tone and the fine phraseology lug the readers into believing that a love for knowledge and moral principle is the sole driving force that determines the policy of such papers, whereas in reality these features represent a cunning way of disarming any opposition that might be directed against the J and their press. Soviets, remember? It's funny, like, injected from other, it says the effervescent tone of the fine phraseology lugged the readers into believing. It's the same thing he's doing. He's being a hypocrite. He doesn't like it when they use smart words, but he uses all these fancy words, usually when it seems like he's lying the most. But anyway, they make such a parade of respectability that the imbecile readers are all the more ready to believe that the excess which other papers indulge in are only of a mild nature and not such as to warrant legal action being taken against them. Indeed, such action might trespass on the freedom of the press, that expression being a euphemism under which such papers escape legal punishment for deceiving the public and poisoning the public mind. That is true. If you watch the movie Shock and Awe, I think it is. I think it's called Shock and Awe. But you can look it up. It has what's his face in it from Men in Black, Tommy Lee Jones. That's his name, right? That's not like the guy with the thing, right? Hopefully I'm not saying the wrong name. And it's about the only newspaper, allegedly, that was saying the truth about Iraq and trying to prove that there was no WMDs and there was no reason for invasion. And every other news outlet, New York Times, all of them, especially New York Times, supported this and got the public will in line to invade Iraq. And then when it came out later that it was all a lie, just like IBM and Watson helping Hitler accomplish the Holocaust, the New York Times just apologizes for its readers. Oh, I'm sorry we got your will to support a false invasion on false pretenses that murdered over 1 million people. We apologize, even though Madeleine Albright says that 500,000 Iraqi children starved to death because of sanctions put on Saddam was worth it. She says this because she says, I am mistress. I will be mistress forever. Where is she now? I think she's not. I think she's not on this earth anymore. I'm not sure. I think she's still alive, or I think she just passed or something like that. Who knows? They're already like ghosts, so you don't even know when they float away. So, Mr. Hittite continues, indeed, such action might trespass on the freedom of the press, public mind. Hence, the authorities are very slow indeed to take any steps against these journalistic bandits for fear of immediately alienating the sympathy of the so-called respectable press. A fear that is only too well founded. For the moment any attempt is made to proceed against any member of the gutter press, all the others rush to its assistance at once, not indeed to support its policy, but simply and solely to defend the principle of freedom of the press and liberty of public opinion. This outcry will succeed in cowering the most stalwart, for it comes from the mouth of what is called decent journalism. So, when it says the wilderness beast full of blasphemous names, they belong to the seven, but are going to destruction. It's one man, basically, but 10 horns, or strategoi, that align with him. So there's probably countries, militaries possibly, like France and all that, agreeing with the genocide in Gaza, and which will spread other places if nobody does anything. And a lot of these places have blasphemous names on them, like what I call Yahoo News. It's Yahoo is one of the ways you pronounce Elohim's memorial name, especially when you put it on a name. Like Elijah is actually Eliyahu. So there's many blasphemous names. The 5G company in China is called Huawei. That's a little bit too familiar, isn't it? I see you. And I think its symbol is a Pegasus, which is a white horse without a rider. Another blasphemy. And it was interesting in Billy Graham's book where he says, just as I am, trying to be like the song, but he's actually blasphemously saying that he is just as I am. Or, Ayah, Asarayah. Who is blessed forever. Who is Baruch Olam. Amen. Yahovah, not anybody else unless they submit to him. He went to meet Truman and supposedly President Truman, and supposedly nobody was able to go in there, the press. And this is President Truman when he was president. And he shook his hand and did something else, 'cause I think they allegedly prayed or something. But the media outside asked them what they did there, and they said to show it to them. It's some weird lie where Billy Graham and these two men next to him, so he's trying to be a false messiah while he's got the two that stand next to him. If you read scripture, you know what they're doing. And they all have their hats off and they're kneeling to the press because they're facing the people taking pictures. And they're like, oh, we took this picture because we were showing them what we did in the office. I'm like, oh, yeah. I know that's what you did in the office, but it's a poor excuse. Billy Graham and his two friends kneeled to the press. And that's why that's why he's America's pastor. So an old Freemason book from like I think the 80s or 90s. It talked about in that little lip on the cover, on the slip cover, it talked about famous Freemasons, naming George Washington and Benjamin Franklin or something and others. And it actually says Billy Graham. And I don't think there was another one at that time that they could have been referring to. But hey, Freemasons lie sometimes, so they're not supposed to, but they do. Supposedly they're not supposed to lie, but you know what I mean. So he continues, and so this poison was allowed to enter the national bloodstream and infect public life without the government taking any effectual measures to master the course of the disease. It's interesting that even in like psychological terms, he uses the words bloodstream and stuff. It's like, this guy is so materialistic. So he continues, the ridiculous half measures that were taken were in themselves an indication of the process of disintegration that was already threatening to break up the empire. In modern America, allegedly when Obama was president, they signed something into law that the press was allowed to actually spread propaganda. But that might, I don't know if that's true or not, because sometimes these truther pages just tell you something that they found somewhere else, and it's so ridiculous. But supposedly there's like proof, just like Project Mockingbird or something, that in like 2008 or 2010, something like that, they actually signed something that allows the press to do propaganda. Like, it doesn't have to be true necessarily. They just, so that's interesting. It's not like they weren't doing it before, but you know. For an institution, he says, particularly for an institution practically surrenders its existence when it is no longer determined to defend itself with all the weapons at its command. Every half measure is the outward expression of an internal process of decay, which must lead to an external collapse sooner or later. Now this is page 203 at the 39-minute mark. Mr. Hittite says, I believe that our present generation would easily master this danger if they were rightly led. For this generation has gone through certain experiences which must have strengthened the nerves of all those who did not become nervously broken by them. Certainly in the days to come, the Jays, which I think is hobo code for Soviets, will raise a tremendous cry throughout their newspapers once a hand is laid on their favorite nest. Once a move is made to put an end to this scandalous press, and once this instrument which shapes public opinion is brought under state control and no longer left in the hands of aliens and enemies of the people, I am certain that this will be easier for us than it was for our fathers. The scream of the 12-inch shrapnel is more penetrating than the hiss of 1,000 J newspaper vipers. Soviets, in my opinion. Therefore, let them go on with their hissing. Interesting is that you're supposed to hiss at something that God has destroyed, but I mean, what's interesting is right when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, there was like this paper, I think it was whatever was in Jerusalem at the time, and it said Judea boycotts Germany. It's like, I wonder who these people were who did it, because it seems like even though they probably read his book and there was good Hebrews and good Christians that really took heed to it, I feel like this was a ploy to damage Hebrews and Christians, by just immediately saying, posting like that. Because remember, it was like the Jerusalem Post or something, and Rothschild had originally bought Jerusalem in the 20s or something like that, 1920s. So there's all kinds of weird things going on there. And then some of the papers even using the number 6 million before anything happened. There's a lot of players in this. That's why the IBM technology is so important in this subject, because it helped tremendously. Yet it's still a company, and their current AI model honors the perpetrator by calling it Watson. So he continues, a further example of the weak and hesitating way in which vital national problems were dealt with in pre-war Germany is the following. Hand in hand with the political and moral process of infecting the nation, for many years an equally virulent process of infection had been attacking the public health of the people. In large cities, particularly syphilis steadily increased, and tuberculosis kept pace with it and reaping its harvest of death almost in every part of the country. Interesting. So that's STDs and respiratory illness. He continues, although in both cases, I wonder if those two mix at some point. And then the same doctor that dealt with the STDs now is dealing with the, you know who I'm talking about. Those who know. He continues, although in both cases the effect on the nation was alarming, it seemed as if nobody was in a position to undertake any decisive measures against these scourges. In the case of syphilis, especially, the attitude of the state and public bodies was one of absolute capitulation. They probably had it too. To combat, might have came from that. I don't want to get into it. To combat this state of affairs, he says, something of far wider sweep should have been undertaken than was really done. The discovery of a remedy which is of a questionable nature and the excellent way in which it was placed on the market were only of little assistance in fighting such a scourge. Oh man, history just repeats itself, don't it? Here again, he says, the only course to adopt is to attack the disease in its causes rather than in its symptoms. You see how these dictators, these tyrants, they are speaking of a disease, but it doesn't seem like they're saying, it seems like they're saying something passive aggressively. Just like they reveal in The Matrix when Agent Smith is likening mankind to a disease. Very, very interesting. So he continues, but in this case, the primary cause is to be found in the manner in which love has been prostituted. Even though this did not directly bring about the fearful disease itself, the nation must still suffer serious damage thereby. For the moral havoc resulting from this prostitution would be sufficient to bring about the destruction of the nation. slowly but surely. This Jayizing, literally Sovietizing, of our spiritual life and mammonizing of our natural instinct for procreation will sooner or later work havoc with our whole posterity. Interesting, because he mammonized the whole nation. I mean, the Nazi regime was highly materialistic. Their flags were everywhere, so it was disorienting. Yeah, to the point of being disoriented. And the buildings were ugly. I mean, for somebody who acted like he was a great architect, a lot of them were very Masonic. A lot of his buildings and his structures were very Masonic. He continues, for instead of strong, healthy children blessed with natural feelings, we shall see miserable specimens of humanity resulting from economic calculation. For economic considerations are becoming more and more the foundations of marriage. And the sole preliminary condition of it. Wow. And love looks for an outlet elsewhere. I feel like somebody else wrote that. But hey, wicked people can say smart things. Wow, let me read that again. For economic considerations are becoming more and more the foundations of marriage and the sole preliminary condition of it, and love looks for an outlet elsewhere. Wow. Here, as elsewhere, one may defy nature for a certain period of time, but sooner or later she will take her inexorable revenge, and when man realizes this truth, it is often too late. Yeah, isn't it interesting that these things don't actually have genitalia, but because if they're describing something that submits to something else, they call it female. If you drive a car, it doesn't drive itself. No car drives itself. Go look at the Apocalypse News on Telegram. It's links in the bio. I'm right about that. People call me crazy. Oh, what are you talking about? There's no driverless cars? No. There's no driverless cars. There's only slaves. And driverless people, apparently. So what was I saying? Yeah, so a vehicle is a her because you drive the vehicle, so it submits to you. A government is called a her because it usually has some main leader, governor, president, or king, or whatever, magistrate, that exercises authority over it, and it's usually male. So even if a Greek version of Proverbs calls wisdom a her, it's only in submission. It's not in actual gender, because the wisdom there was Messiah. And a lot of Hebrews knew this in the last 300 years before Messiah, that they actually came up with the concept of the logos. They were just speaking Greek, so that's why they call it logos. But that's another story. So this is now page 204 on the 49-minute mark here. Mr. Hittite says, our own nobility furnishes an example of the devastating consequences that follow from a persistent refusal to recognize the primary conditions necessary for normal wedlock. Here we are openly brought face to face with the results of those reproductive habits, which on the one hand are determined by social pressure and on the other by financial considerations. The one leads to inherited debility, and the other to adulteration of the bloodstrain, for all the J daughters of the department store proprietors are looked upon as eligible mates to cooperate in the propagating his lordship's stock. They're Soviets, remember? But that's interesting. So I'll say Soviet this time. For all the Soviet daughters of the department store proprietors are looked upon as eligible mates to cooperate in propagating his lordship's stock. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. If these people become successful because they're intelligent and they go by Torah, whether they're doing it in pretense or doing it to honor Elohim, doesn't matter. It still propagates Torah, doesn't it? If their daughters are good looking and their daughters are successful, what's wrong with that? It's again envy. It's envy. But anyway, he's describing Soviets anyway. So he continues, and the stock certainly looks it. All this leads to absolute degeneration. Nowadays, our bourgeoisie are making efforts to follow in the same path. They will come to the same journey's end. These unpleasant truths are hastily and nonchalantly brushed aside as if by so doing the real state of affairs could also be abolished. But no, it cannot be denied that the population of our great towns and cities is tending more and more to avail of prostitution in the exercise of its amorous instincts, and is thus becoming more and more contaminated by the scourge of venereal disease. On the one hand, the visible effects of this mass infection can be observed in our insane asylums, and on the other hand, alas, among the children at home. These are the doleful and tragic witnesses to the steadily increasing scourge that is poisoning our sexual life. Their sufferings are the visible results of parental vice. We're seeing a lot of that right now. We try to give them chemicals and then get immunity so that the results can't be traced back to them and they're thrown in prison where they belong. It's weird. I just thought of the proverb, I think it is, today, where it says, the harlot eats, it's literally the prostitute eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done no wrong. How's that for graphic? And it's in scripture. We all know what that means. Mr. Hittite continues, there are many ways of becoming resigned to this unpleasant and terrible fact. Many people go about seeing nothing, or, to be more correct, not wanting to see anything. This is by far the simplest and cheapest attitude to adopt. Others cover themselves in the sacred mantle of prudery. Oh, I've seen that. As ridiculous as it is false. Yeah, so the worst ones are all prudy. And they like, oh, a child can't sit on your knee. That's weird. It's like, the hell? You're disgusting. Get out of here. It literally talks about with Jeremiah, the children sat on his knee and he bounced them. So these people are truly disgusting, and so they cover it in prudiness. Because I've already told you about sex magic and all that. They're practitioners of it, and they'll say everything is inappropriate. It's like, oh yeah, we know who you are. So, Mr. Hittite continues, they describe the whole condition of affairs as sinful and are profoundly indignant when brought face to face with a victim. We're seeing this with all that Weinstein stuff, all the Trump stuff, with Clinton and all that. He continues, they close their eyes in reverent abhorrence to this godless scourge and pray to the Almighty that he, if possible, after their own death, may rain down fire and brimstone as on Sodom and Gomorrah, and so once again make an outstanding example of this shameless section of humanity. Wow. Yeah. So basically they say, oh, even though you're defending these people, and even though you're exposing evil, just talking about it brings evil. And it's not honoring God. It's like, okay, There's the broodiness. Rearing its head. So it can be whacked with a staff. Finally, he says, there are those who are well aware of the terrible results which this scourge will and must bring about, but they merely shrug their shoulders, fully convinced of their inability to undertake anything against this peril. Hence, matters are allowed to take their own course. Undoubtedly, he says, all this is very convenient and simple. Only it must not be overlooked that this convenient way of approaching things can have fatal consequences for our national life. So even though he's complaining about this stuff, he says that Germans would be superior without the influence of Christianity. I don't know what page it's at, but we got to get to it at some point because I know he says it. Because I was very, that's the one part that shocked me and why I could never call him good no matter what I believed about World War II. I'm like, I can't call him good. Something that he's not good. The excuse, he says, that other nations are also not faring any better does not alter the fact that our own deterioration, except that the feeling of sympathy for other stricken nations makes our own suffering easier to bear. But the important question that arises here is, which nation will be the first to take the initiative in mastering this scourge, and which nations will succumb to it? This will be the final upshoot of the whole situation. The present is a period of probation for racial values, he says. Oh, jeez. The race that fails to come through the test will simply die out, and its place will be taken by the healthier and stronger races, which will be able to endure greater hardships. Yeah, it's like, then how do you explain America? Because he likes to say all these good things about America, yet America is all different kinds of people. So is Britain. And so is Germany. Germany's never been heterogeneous. But this is the 58-minute mark, so I'm going to end it right here. 2 more streams to go, and this section will be done. And the next one, I think I'm going to call it International Business Monsters Incorporated. I already picked it because I didn't want to put International Business Machines because, I don't know, they might try some weird legal thing there. Like you can't actually say it, so I'm going to mix it. And that should be cool. So let's play some outro music here. Which one's this one? Oh, I like this one. Oh no, I gotta mute myself first here.
Who is your daddy?